And APB, American Protection Bureau, voted #1 best on Long Island for all your security needs. Call 631-390-9050. That's 631-390-9050. APB.
Feel that she might actually like me for some strange reason, which I still wonder about to this day. But she reached out to me. I wound up coming down to Panama City Beach, and we got married by her son, Wahoo Jr., Zach. And that's where I am now. So that's the story.
That's a good one.
Yeah.
Love and wrestling,
bad.
Bill. Love and wrestling.
Yeah.
So, Bill,
A lot of that.
for fans who may not know who you are, and I'm sure most everybody does, can you lend an open hand or arm to the fans out there and tell them a little bit about yourself?
Well, David and Carrie, I've known them since they were little kids. My dad had a motorcycle shop, had several around North Texas and in Louisiana. And Fritz came in and bought mini bikes from my dad. And I would take them out to the house and go pick them up when I was in high school. And that's how we became friends. And I was racing back then, and Fritz would bring the kids out to watch me race or practice when I was in town. And that's how we got started. They were younger. Kevin's 3 years younger than me. And when I was 15 and 16, that's a punk kid. We didn't hang out or anything. As we got older, David and I became close and became like brothers. And he would, when I was in town from racing and he was in town, we would go out and party and go to concerts, double date, things like that. And one day he called me and he said, "Can you take me to Will Rogers," which was the Monday night TV show for Channel 11 in Dallas. And I said, "Yeah." I said, "I can do that." I'd never been to a wrestling match. We've been friends all this time. I'd never win. And so I said, "Yeah, I can do that." And he said, "Well, bring me in your new Fleetwood Brougham Cadillac." And I throw that out because it's part of a different story later. And it's a diesel, which they wouldn't get out of the way. He said, "Wear your cowboy hat and your sport coat." And I'm going, "Why?" And he said, just do it. So I said, "Okay." So I picked him up and we pulled around behind Will Rogers Coliseum, and the fans were going nuts. I'd never been. And we pulled up and they're screaming and yelling and doing everything that they would do back then. I said, "I'll get your bags. I'm going in." So I went in the back door. He came in a few minutes later, said, "Go on up and sit up in the upstairs." So I said, "Okay." So matches went on, matches finished. Usher came and got me. We went back out, fought all the fans, took off. And that was it. He called me the next week and said, "My car's still broke." He said, "Can you take me again?" I said, "Sure." "Wear your hat and coat." And I'm going, "Why?" He said, just do it." So same thing happened. Well, this went on for 6 or 7 weeks, and the fans started yelling at me, wanting an autograph, and and I was going, no. I said, I'm nobody, and I'd run upstairs. One night, it was getting ready for the matches, and one of the ushers came up and said, "Carrie and David want you down at the dressing room door." And that was new. I wasn't part of anything. I wasn't supposed to be down there. So I went down. David stuck his head out the door and he was laughing. He slammed the door. Carrie stuck his head out the door. He's laughing. He slams the door. The music starts. They come out. They grab me and said, "Walk us a little ways." That was something brand new. I'd never done that. And so we go through the tunnel and we're coming out and the music's going, and Carrie reaches down and grabs my knee and said, "Have you, do you still have any pain in your knee? Can you use your knee?" And I said, "Yeah." And David said, "Can you run?" And I said, "Well, I could. And they said, good. And about that time, the music hit. And they said, get our ass to the ring. And they pushed me through the curtain. And I had to fight. And that's the first time I did anything. Didn't know I was going to do it. Got him to the ring. And I was ticked. I turned around and went straight back. And, after the matches, David got in the car. I chewed him out all the way home. So I knew that, Well, the next morning, Fritz called me. And again, he called me. Brian Adidas was the 6th Von Erichs son. I was the 7th. That's what Fritz called us. So he called me and he said, you got 15 minutes to get to the house. I said, I'll be there in 10. And I pulled in, and David and Carrie are in the corner with their heads like this, and they're laughing. Everybody's in the kitchen, and Fritz looks at me and he said, what were you thinking? And I said, I was thinking how I was going to get here today and kick their butts. And Fritz said, that wasn't your idea? And I said, no, that wasn't my idea. He said, you didn't want to go to the ring. And I said, no, I didn't want to go to the ring. And he looked at the boys and he said, he's telling the truth, isn't he? And they're going, yeah, he's telling the truth. And so Fritz looked at me for a minute and he goes, okay, you start Monday. And he turns around and walks off. And that's how I got started. It was
Wow.
my idea. And it wasn't Fritz's idea. It was David and Carrie tricking me in the business. And when Fritz found out I didn't want to be part of it, and that
Phil, take us through what was going through your mind. After all, you're friends with them. You never saw them or got to experience them live. You're pulling behind the building, and you basically are witnessing, if I can say so, the Texas version of Beatlemania as far as how these girls. What's going through your mind at that moment?
The Beatlemania type thing. I mean, they were all over the car. They were screaming, not at me this time. It was strictly at David. They were grabbing him, screaming at him, pulling on his jacket, and that's when I said, I'm not doing this. I took his trunk and went in and said, I'll meet you inside. And like I said, I had never been. And I had to wait till he came in, and then he said, just go on upstairs and sit. And it's where it was at Will Rogers. You come out of the dressing room door, and there were stairs right across the aisle where you go up into the upper part. And that's where the family and everybody sat that wasn't working. And then the entry aisle was right next to it. And that's where he tricked me into pushing me through. And so, I started there at the Sportatorium. Will Rogers. And that went on for about 8 weeks. And then they moved me over to the Sportatorium, which was a completely different place. Will Rogers, safe, easy. Sportatorium is one of the most dangerous, hardest venues we ever did. But it's the place everybody loved to get back to every Friday night.